good.
Awesome. Boa tarde, pessoal. Meu nome é André Noronha. Um grande prazer estar aqui com vocês nesse mais um congresso, né, da gestão do conhecimento aqui da SBGC. Hoje nós estamos com um palestrante bastante especial aqui com a gente.
SBGC, we have a special guest here with us, David Griffiths. I'll be introducing him soon. But before introducing him, I would like to thank for Karine and Luana, the translators. They will be helping us with the translation, making it more accessible for everyone, for all the participants.
Então, falando rapidamente sobre o
David Griffiths holds a PhD in knowledge management and holds a master's degree in training and development management. He's also an international speaker, consultant, and founder of K3 Cubed. The company is focused on consulting and benchmarking solutions for organizations facing challenges in the areas of knowledge management, change management, and transformational leadership. He has worked on 125 projects in 17 different countries for large companies in various sectors such as manufacturing, technology, energy, construction, pharmaceutical, and healthcare. He has also worked extensively in the public sector. Dave has won several international awards, including being listed in the top 10 knowledge management influencers in the world. And he's here today to provoke you with insights and ideas.
So David, welcome to our event. We're really happy to have you with us today. And with that, I'll pass the baton to you so you can start with your ideas and slides. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for the invite. Thank you very much for tuning in to listen to me. I always find this strange in this COVID world that we live in. I love being able to talk with people, and I'm thrilled that you're there. I just wish I could see you and interact with you. But I'm going to change things up a little bit. This virtual world that we now live in, this hybrid environment where I can come from you and speak to you all the way from the south coast of England, where it's currently 6 p.m. There are opportunities here. So before I start, I'd like to make this a little bit more interactive. I want to make this time that we spend together as valuable as possible to you. You're giving me your time and listening. And I've got a question for you that you can type in the chat. And that is, what do you want most from our time together? You've seen the theme for the keynote. You've heard a little bit about me. What are you hoping that I can give you today? And I'd like to give you a couple of minutes, if you don't mind. Just type into the chat. They'll let me know. And if you could also let me know any sectors you're in so that I can try and bring forward some stories and share some case examples that might be of interest to you. So if you don't mind, before we start, a couple of minutes of work for you. Type away in the chat for me.
Mariana, se você puder compartilhar o chat, por favor.
Mari, if you can please share the chat.
That would be great, thank you. Is anything coming through? Is there anybody out there?
I guess we have a few answers already.
Okay, I'm not seeing them come through. Can you, how to resist change? How to overcome resistance to change? I think I just saw that. Definitely can help with that. If you can help me with any translation, I would like to see broad perspectives on how knowledge management contribute to organizations and society. That's interesting. I'll see what I can do for you. Is that Roberto? Yeah, let me see what I can do. I'm definitely going to try and challenge your perspective on what knowledge management is. Brazilian tax. Yeah, I've done a lot of work with the certified public accounting profession in the US. I'll share some. We won a national award over there for our knowledge management work. I'll gladly share some of the stories from that.
Yeah, Selma is asking for some experience in the public sector as well.
Public sector, yeah, I can.
Yep.
I've done some government work in the UK recently that I can share with. Communication platforms to implement knowledge management. That's interesting.
Definitely, yeah.
Like some insights about knowledge management. We live in an era that our knowledge is spread in emails, wikis, documents, social media, apps, etc. Daniel, definitely we will be challenging some of those ideas.
Oh, there's an interesting one here. Knowledge management as a technology for the society and not for the organizations. That's an interesting one.
This is interesting. So that idea of knowledge management as a technology, that's interesting. And perhaps this is a good start. Thank you. Okay, let's see where we go. If we can go back to my presentation, and if anything more interesting comes on the chat, please let me know. Do we need to go back to me sharing the screen?
I guess you need to share again, yeah.
Yeah, no problem at all. And it's gone, 2 seconds. So we lost the, unfortunately, in the wonders of technology, we lost the presentation. There it is, okay. You back with me?
Not yet.
Okay. We're back?
Yep, okay, yep, we're back.
Okay. So you've, at the moment, the first thing I'd like to say is, I want to share a quick story. Okay, so the theme here is about creative destruction and some of the things that prompt change. So I don't know how many of you out there have children, but I have a 10-year-old daughter. If you follow my work, I apologize because this story is now a couple of years old, but it's my favorite story about the changing world. So my daughter, when she was 8, we were planning on going away, and she had some maths homework that she had to complete for school. And I'm proud of my daughter. She's pretty smart. So she was doing some advanced maths for an 8-year-old. And she was given a worksheet that, I've got to be honest, even for me, I was looking at and going, this is going to take time. And she completed 8, what I would regard as complicated maths questions for an 8-year-old in about 15 minutes. And you know, as parents, for those of you with children, you get very suspicious about what's going on. And she brought it down, and I was like, my daughter's name is Chanel, by the way. And I turned around to her and said, Chanel, you haven't done it this quick, and all the answers are correct. And she was like, no, Dad, I did this. And, you know, as a parent, you start to go, no, they're not being totally truthful with me. And I was like, okay, so I read out some of the questions, and she was able to tell me the answers. And I was like, okay. So I wrote down new problems and asked her to go away. 15 minutes later, she came back, and every single one was incorrect. And so at that point, you're going, okay, my baby girl, I'm really sorry, but, you know, you need to be truthful with me. You need to trust me. And she was like, Dad, I did this myself. And I said, Chanel, I'm really sorry, but it obviously doesn't match. You know, you're getting them wrong now. And I was like, did you cheat? Because the answers were in the back of the book. So I said, you know, did you cheat? And she was like, Dad, you know, you've always told me not to cheat. It's better to get things wrong and learn than to cheat. She said, I promise you I didn't cheat. And I was like, okay, did you use a calculator? No, I did not use a calculator. Okay, so you didn't look at the answers in the back of the book, and you didn't use a calculator. No. I said, so, but this doesn't make sense. And as parents, you know, when you get into those conversations where it's like going round and round, I know you're not telling me the truth. I know that you didn't do what you said you did, and it's just getting frustrating. So we had to take a break, and I asked her to go away and think about it. And I got to a point that I was like, you know, we are not leaving to go away until we have a truthful conversation. And she came down, she said, talk to me. And I said, okay, what happened? And she said, Dad, I did not cheat. I did not look at the answers in the back of the book. I did not use a calculator. And I was like, okay, so what did you do? She said, I asked Siri. And that is the new world that we are living in. We are growing up with we have a generation that is growing up where Siri has the answer to everything. But what happens when Siri doesn't have the answer? And can Siri ever have all the answers? So today I want to share my view on knowledge management. I'll show you some evidence. You can make your own mind up about what I'm suggesting to you. So what I want to start with is really a different view on KM. So I'm going to give you a typical knowledge management scenario. When people leave an organization, all right, we want to capture their knowledge. We put them through exit interviews and they'll sit down with us and, they'll sit down with a subject matter expert or with a knowledge manager, and we'll try and capture their knowledge to help the organization, to make it available for other people to use, to access. Who knows when we'll need it in the future? And what I'm going to ask you is, what could we do different? If that knowledge is important, what could we do different? And I'll share an example at the end, towards the end of this presentation. Now I want to give you another challenge. All right, we've got 90 minutes together, the typical length of an exit interview. I want to capture your knowledge base. I want to challenge you in 90 minutes to write down everything you know about knowledge management. Not only that, I'm going to ask you what is 100% of what you know about knowledge management that could be potentially meaningful or valuable to others. Once you've worked that out, I want you to externalize it. I want you to be able to put it somewhere. I want you to tag it. I want you to index it. I want you to catalog it. And then I want you to tell me how you know it's meaningful and valuable to others, that we should even put our effort into this. I want you to consider what time and space do others need to have shared to be able to inherit your knowledge. Not only that, what have you forgotten about what you know? What can't you write down at all? In not being able to write it all down, then what's valuable in the first place? And why do we expect this of subject matter experts? Why do we set out as knowledge management to capture everything, to get it written down, to store it? These are some of the questions that I want you to ponder as we're going through today. This is one of my favorite quotes. And it's about realizing where we are in order to understand where we're going to go. As I said, I'm going to share the stories with you. And those of you who know me, if you followed my work, you'll know I love knowledge management. I love the challenge it presents, but I'm not in love with the solutions that knowledge management presents. Because too often, knowledge management is a solution in search of a problem. And that has caused knowledge management to stress and fail for decades. It's about time we needed to question what we do that is meaningful and valuable.
Precisamos nos questionar sobre o que fazemos. O que realmente faz sentido? O que é valioso?
To our customers.
O que é valioso para os nossos clientes?
I'm going to stop a second because for some reason now the translation is now on my speaker. Is it gone? Okay. There's been a lack of consideration of what I call mutuality. And what I mean by that is for knowledge management to thrive, to create value, then we have to create meaning and value for the people, processes, and systems in our community. If we create value for them, if they create value, we become valuable. My opening gambit for you today is knowledge management has more lives than a cat. I've been around knowledge management for a little bit longer than I care to remember these days. And I think I've seen it go through 4 deaths and 5 resurrections. What this shows is that organizations have an appetite to create value from knowledge. They see the value of knowledge, but they don't find the solutions. We're not tapping into what it is that they actually need. Fundamentally, knowledge is a human condition. Humans are social. We compete and collaborate in shared space and time. Our environment is dynamic. So why has knowledge management for the last 20 or so years seemed so static? You know, 20 years ago, we were talking about lessons learned, communities of practice. We're still doing it. 20 years ago, we were talking about the challenges of SharePoint and governance and taxonomies and metadata. We're still doing it. If knowledge workers create the currency that drives and exploits a knowledge economy, and knowledge is a human condition, why is knowledge management so often an IT function? I'm one of these people that I don't hide it. I believe that the IT view, this technology-led view of knowledge management, is outdated. The technology provides us tools, it provides us opportunities, but knowledge is a human condition. And so if we're going to persist with this view of knowledge management being about technology, then I believe we are going to be in a position where knowledge management will have to be replaced. The theory of creative destruction assumes that long-standing arrangements and assumptions must be destroyed to free up resources and energy to be deployed for innovation. Evolutionary processes reward improvements and innovations and punish less efficient people, processes, and systems. My argument is that knowledge management has been, for the last couple of decades, punished because it is inefficient. And it's time to critically challenge our founding assumptions about what knowledge management actually is. My next question, I've got lots of questions for you. I hope you're enjoying them. Is knowledge management of the people? What I mean by this, in a challenge reminiscent of today, the challenge we face today, the Polynesians created a dilemma for early colonial explorers. The Europeans couldn't fathom out how the Polynesians had traversed the Pacific, an ocean that covers 1/3 of our Earth's surface, without any of the technology that had been acquired by the Europeans, things like the compass, sextant, chronometer, maps, and charts. That's a bit like our knowledge management programs today, focusing on technology-led capture techniques. European explorers assumed that the Polynesians should not have been able to explore the Pacific without their technology. It couldn't be done. So how did they do it? Polynesian navigators traversed the complex island networks of the Pacific, steering their ocean-going craft by celestial navigation. Knowledge of the wind and wave patterns and other environmental reference points, such locations of habitats of marine mammals, navigator birds, and phosphorescences. However, this immersive approach, being one of navigating by being of the ocean, didn't sit with the European view of navigation, which was based on maps, logs, compasses, readings, and chronological timekeeping. The difference is that European navigators saw themselves as removed from the world that they were traveling in. They were a temporary ship. The people are a temporary object on the water, where their tools recorded and represented the movement within the environment. The Polynesians, on the other hand, saw themselves as being of the water, immersed in the environment. The Polynesians believe that knowledge transfer happens person to person, where the sanctity of knowledge is bound by identity, with shared time, people, and place. How does the digital format capture this? How does IT capture this? If you read the poem that's on that slide, it's not difficult to translate the Maori challenge to what is seen as our library culture today. That almost passion for cataloging, indexing, tagging, extracting knowledge. And that view hasn't worked for a long time. So why do we persist with it? When I go into organizations and I sit down with a knowledge management team or anybody that wants to talk to me about knowledge management, I'll ask them, what do you mean by knowledge management? What's your definition of it? So if I come in and with your organization, we start chatting about it, what do you mean by knowledge management? And I'll tell you something else. I don't mean to be rude, but I don't care. What I do care about is how the people in the organization, our customers, our community, how they see knowledge management. What's their view? Because they, the participants, are the ones that should be shaping what we do, not us shaping what they do. This image that you can see on the screen is one of my favorite pictures in terms of trying to explain the classic view of knowledge management. Here we are on the sea, we're not of the sea. We sit ready to extract knowledge from its body of experiences, time and place. We are sitting ready to extract and record everything. And knowledge management, the knowledge management that we chat about today, that you were mentioning in that discussion at the start, where we automatically assume that knowledge management and technology are like this. That's the result of all the decisions that have been taken by knowledge managers and organizations, researchers to this point. What I'm interested in is where we're going next and what you can do to help influence our future. Because if what we have is not working or could be better, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to do to make it better? I'd like to play a little bit of a game with you, if you don't mind. Let's make this interesting. So the quote that's on the screen at the moment, I'd like you to date it. I'm going to give you just, a few seconds to read it. I'm not going to read it to you. And I'd like you to date it. You don't have to write it in the chat, just get a date in your head. But this quote is important because it is talking about knowledge as a value creation tool for an organization. It is a method for value creation. And we have to be interested in knowledge of all our resources, intellectual, knowledge of the intellectual resource and how we can make a most of them. Okay? 3, 2, 1. This is from 1918. So way back, we're talking 103 years ago, we were talking about the value of knowledge to an organization in terms of creating value for the organization. Next one for you. What is a knowledge organization? Here we're saying that it's arranged, the results of all its efforts are recorded and analyzed. Does this sound like the knowledge management of today? The lessons to be learned and the experiences to be gained are thus made as much of a company's assets as more tangible things and can be used in the direction of future undertakings. The lessons to be learned. Lessons learned. How many of your organizations deal in lessons learned? Project managers on retrospectives, recording all the things that went wrong and could be done better for future projects to learn from. Again, I'm going to give you 5 seconds. What year? 4, 3, 2, 1. 1942. Okay, the next one. Productive work in today's society and economy is work that applies vision, knowledge, and concept. Works that is based on the mind rather than the hand. So we're now talking about this shift in how we create value to that being of intellectual capital. The value of knowledge again. So we're going back to nutting in 1918 and we're now coming forward. And this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, what is often referred to as the grandfather of knowledge management. This is Drucker and his idea of the knowledge worker, and this is coming from 1959. When was knowledge management first around? Because for most people, that means sometime in the early to mid-90s. So I've done a lot of research over the years, and as part of my PhD, I wanted to find out what were the roots, where did the roots of knowledge management go? So this is the first reference that I can find in any literature to the term knowledge management. And here we're talking about public policy for the production, dissemination, and use of information as it applies to public policy information. And can I just say, I want you to hold on to that definition of knowledge management, and within the definition, the references to information. But again, your guess. 5, what was the date with the year for the first mention of knowledge management? 4, 3, 2, 1. It's from 1974. It was a US discussion on public administration, so 47 years ago. By 1977, it was being discussed in marine and environmental science, and importantly, by Hillman in the field of computer science. That gives us the first mention, true mention in the world of IT, 45 years ago. The thing is that we really haven't moved on very much from that position of knowledge and information. This is taken from 2016. This is Deloitte's, this is a Deloitte guide, if you like, on knowledge management. It's in a document called The Simplification of Work, Knowledge Management as a Solution 5 years ago. The core objective of knowledge management is getting the right information to the right people at the right times to help people share experiences and insights and improve the productivity of teams. What's interesting to me is it's what we don't know that causes uncertainty, anxiety, and fear, and stimulates freeze, fight, flight responses in organizations that slows down decision-making and problem solving. Not what we do know, it's what we don't know. You'll also note that Deloitte makes the classic flattening mistake in knowledge management of confusing knowledge with information. You'll have seen it's been happening for, what, 45 years? We talk about knowledge management and we automatically go, knowledge means information. That fits really well with IT, but doesn't fit very well with what is knowledge. Unpick that Deloitte definition a little bit more. Knowledge management, according to Deloitte, is a just-in-time solution to any organization's knowledge problems. It's lovely, it sells well, it's that idea of I can access anything I need when I need it. Who wouldn't want that? But it's snake oil. Because if this is the criteria by which knowledge management should be judged, then we constantly fail. We continue to fail because if we look at our knowledge cycle times, the ability of somebody to access what they need when they need it, then when we run findability tests, when we look at the relevance and the quality of information or knowledge that's being presented to people, then unfortunately we are missing the target. We are not delivering what we say knowledge management is about, because we cannot guarantee somebody that they will get the knowledge they are looking for at the time they need it. So if that's the criteria for knowledge management, then surely we're failing. I'm going to share a quick story with you from the energy sector. I was doing some work with a large energy provider that works across Europe, and they were very proud of their knowledge management program and their lessons learned program. And they were talking to me about how much it had evolved over a 12-month period, and that it had won internal awards with the business for how far it had come. So I went in to speak to the program lead and talked about performance and impact, etc. And turned around to me and said, the key for us is 12 months ago, we had 100 lessons learned from all our projects. Today, we have 1,100. That's an exponential jump. This is incredible. This is how successful our lessons learned program is. So when I started, I love data, by the way. People who know me will tell you that I'm very data driven. I like evidence. So I'm asking for things like access rates, findability tests. I'm asking about how, once we access a document, how do we know that people are actioning the lessons learned? And the look I got was, yeah, we never think of that. So it's great that we can report on the fact that we now have these 1,100 lessons learned, but we don't actually know what we do with them. So we went out and talked to engineers, the actual people who create these lessons learned. We did findability tests. we found that in 95% of cases, we couldn't actually access what we were looking for in the first page of search returns. That's incredibly low. We then talk to the engineers and we're looking at the actual lessons learned that are being presented. And they turn around to us and say, we don't even bother to use the system anymore. We don't use the system because 90% of what we actually find, we already know. It's just common knowledge. We just do it because we have to do it from a compliance perspective. We have to publish these lessons learned. The other 10% that is potentially useful is written in such a way that 90% of the people can't understand it. It goes back to that shared time and space. It's written in a language that the vast majority of people, once that knowledge is removed from that time and space, they can't fathom it. They can't use it because they don't have the shared context. In another example, I worked with a healthcare system in the United States, and they'd had a lot of complaints over a 2-year period where it had contributed to critical failings in patient care, patient experience. So they decided to implement a new intranet going through Microsoft. And we were talking to the intranet project team about launch, and they couldn't understand how the search engine worked to be able to optimize it in terms of taxonomy, formatting, metadata, etc. But all they did know is what they had before didn't work, that it was just people just complained, stopped using it. But they got to a point in the project where all they did was port over all the old data and information into the new intranet and expected that the new intranet, the new search engine, the new algorithm would just sort it out for them. And it's not going to take a genius to realize what happens next. People are now dissatisfied with the new intranet because it's still not finding what they need. Fundamentally, the knowledge management team didn't understand the algorithm that was used for the search or how to optimize the knowledge assets, our knowledge objects, for findability. So if this is our challenge, if this is what's going on, then is knowledge management really working? If this is what knowledge management is about, and this idea of getting the right knowledge to the right people at the right time, if that's the standard to which we're being held, we fail. Here's the next part. If you look at that Deloitte definition, it says it's to improve the productivity of teams, which means that if we present the right knowledge to the right people at the right time, it's going to create an impact, a demonstrable change to improvement in productivity. So if that's the case, not only should we be able to demonstrate that we are presenting the knowledge, but we should be able to report on the impact of the knowledge accessed, how it is actioned. And if you look at your own knowledge management programs, how many of you are currently looking at impact? Are you looking at the possibility that any impact is positive or negative? That just because we present knowledge and access and it's accessed and actioned, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have a positive impact. Our assumption is that just by accessing it and actioning it, something good will happen. So it's over to you. What does your reporting look like? Are you reporting on impact? Because if you're not reporting on the impact and the results that come from that change, then you can't be doing knowledge management. Move us forward to the present. So this is the Deloitte Human Capital Report from 2020. And I find this report really interesting when you start to look back on the history of KM and what's happened and where we are today. So this report, it was 8,949 respondents. They're coming from across the globe. And this is what KM does according to observers and participants of knowledge management. I'm just going to let you look at the slide for a second. And I don't know about you, but the thing that jumps out at me that gets me a little concerned is that only 36% of respondents believe knowledge management exists to obtain value from knowledge. Go back to Nutting 103 years ago when we were talking about that it's about value creation, that it's great that we've got a knowledge, but we've got to actually turn that into value. We've got to action it. We've got to do something with it that creates value. Capturing it isn't good enough. But unfortunately, if you look at it, 55% of people think documenting and disseminating knowledge is the main function. Preserving knowledge, but for what purpose? Preserving it to use it, to do something with it. If we're using it, then how are we creating impact? It's going back to this idea of capturing it just isn't good enough. And that's the problem for knowledge management. That's where we constantly get in trouble. That's where we constantly find ourselves in a position of knowledge management dying a death, but nothing's there to replace it. So we like the idea of managing knowledge, of creating value from it, bring knowledge management back from the death, but we just get back into the same problem all over again. Dig deeper into the Deloitte report, and you find that 75% of organizations say that creating and preserving knowledge across evolving workforces is important or very important. Creating knowledge, not just preserving it, creating it. 82% of respondents who said their organizations need to do a better job of tying knowledge to action. And when we're talking about action, we start to look at indicators around improvements to safety, time, efficiencies, innovation, quality, costs, customer and employee experiences. But we need to identify those indicators of the things that we are looking to impact, to create a positive change to. 79% of respondents who admitted that they must be more effective at creative knowledge to jumpstart innovations and launch new products and services. This is why I don't really care about KM's definition of what KM is. I'm more interested in how others see knowledge, because when we look at these reports, they're telling us that it's not about the capture so much. It's not even about the sharing. It's about what we're doing to help people create knowledge, to create value. And that is the challenge that I believe that we can do better at. I think that we've got lots of experience of capturing this knowledge, but it doesn't really work. It's the access and action that becomes interesting. So this is coming from Nanaka. So Nanaka, he's been lauded and derided as a founding father of our modern KM movement. Again, those of you who follow my work, I'm not the biggest fan of Seki. We can argue it and the problems that it's caused, but Nanaka's most valuable contribution is too often missed. If you like, it's his sequel, The Knowledge Worker Strikes Back. In it, he wrote about bar. It's a Japanese word that meaning space, and it was used by the authors to emphasize that knowledge is created by people in a given context of time and space. Back to that opening image, if you like, of the person that is sitting there waiting for us to extract knowledge. That's our problem. For too long, we've tried to separate knowledge from the person and the time and space. And this is what Nanak is talking about. There's too little understanding of how organizations actually create and manage knowledge. And really, 21 years ago, he really cracked it. We lack knowledge management. We lack a general understanding of knowledge and the knowledge creation process. The KM that we're still talking about today is about information management, not knowledge management, because knowledge is a human condition. People are social. Go back to that idea of the Polynesians and how they used to traverse the Pacific. They didn't do it using the technology. They were of the system, immersed in the system. They weren't removed from the system. The most important aspect, according to Nanaka, of understanding a firm's capability is that continuous capability to create new knowledge out of existing knowledge stocks, if you like. It's not about the stock of knowledge, such as a particular technology that a firm possesses at one time. It's about how we use it to create knowledge. Knowledge management acts to acquire and embed it. It's as much about what we don't know as what we do know. It's about the capabilities that we don't have as much as the capabilities that we do have. Knowledge is created and activated by people. Knowledge is of the people. However, and this is my big struggle, is knowledge management sees people as a node to be governed, aligned, tagged, indexed, catalogued, just like any other information process. For me, knowledge management fails to recognize that people are self-determining nodes in our system. And it is that self-determination that knowledge management needs to influence. We need to be ready to influence people. So I'm going to kind of summarize here for you a little bit, if you don't mind. So knowledge management, this is how I see it. Knowledge management, we look to extract knowledge from its position in time and space. We want to isolate it, tag it, index it, and catalog it. We want to simplify it. We want to almost remove the context, the complicatedness, the complexity of time and space, and simplify it into a document, an image, an infographic. We want to extract it. We want to flatten it down. We want to make a data point out of it. It's a point of control, if you like. The problem is that a point of knowledge is actually a human point. It's a point of time and space. It's a self-determining point, and it can't be isolated, tagged, indexed, and catalogued. It is a complex mix of creation, of time, space, beliefs, attitudes, skills, other knowledge, experience, talent. And to inherit that knowledge, you've got to be able to share that context, to be able to understand it. You've got to be competent enough to be able to relate to the knowledge, to be able to access it, to inherit it. You've got to relate to the time and space in which it was created to truly understand it. And the person that's sharing the knowledge has got to have the autonomy, has got to freely want to share that knowledge. And to do that, the person or the people, the community that they're sharing with have to be fit to inherit it. The way that we treat knowledge at the moment, where it's about extraction and storage and isolation, removal from time and space, it is on the ocean. It is not of the ocean. It is not, our knowledge management today is not being built for the people, of the people. It is being built as something that is removed from people. So I use this. If we were face to face today, I'd ask you to pull out a coin if you've got one and hold it up. And I'd like you to look at it on its surface and flip it around until you've got it and all you can see is a thin line. That is what's happened to knowledge management since Nutting started talking about what the knowledge economy could look like and the value of knowledge all those years ago, 103 years ago. We've ended up with something that is very flat, constrained. Knowledge management needs to apply Ashby's law of requisite variety. KM needs to acquire the requisite variety of beliefs, attitudes, skills, knowledge, experience, and talent to deliver impacting results in speeding knowledge creation flows. Knowledge management is not a library function. It's not an IT function. It's about people and the needs of those people. It is for people. It's about mutuality. It's that for knowledge management to be valuable, we've got to create value for our customers. The reality is that KM teams only thrive in situations where the environment presents the right kind of solvable problem. Problems that align with their current beliefs, attitudes, skills, knowledge, experience, and talent. In this way, success from knowledge management initiatives are governed by something called the Goldilocks Principle, where the value you create, the change that you create, the processes, they're only successful when the conditions are just right. So I hope this translates in South America, but the Goldilocks Principle is about the Goldilocks, 3 bears, and she's always faced with 3 alternatives. So she sees, for example, 3 chairs. One is too small for her, one is too big for her, one is just right. She sees 3 bowls of porridge. One is too salty, one is too sweet, one is too just right. That's the knowledge management situation today. The problems or opportunities presented by our community, our environment, have to align with the narrow spectrum of beliefs, attitudes, skills, knowledge, experience, and talent available within the knowledge management team. So if your team is focused solely on IT and that extraction of knowledge, then the opportunities available to you when you start to look at how you go from capture and storage and sharing to access to action and impact, you are limited by the beliefs, attitudes, skills, knowledge, experience, and talent in your team. That's the Goldilocks Principle. It means that knowledge management teams succeed when they find solvable problems, but stress and fail when they can't find those solvable problems. It naturally follows that the less diversity in the team's basket, those beliefs, attitudes, skills, knowledge, experience, and talent, the narrower the view of the world and the fewer solvable problems that knowledge management can actually take. So if you don't look at your knowledge management team and look at what you mean by knowledge management compared with what your customers, your community means by knowledge management and what they need from knowledge management to not only survive but thrive, then we have a problem. So what's knowledge management to me? Knowledge management is a function of people amplified by their experiences, amplified by space, and amplified by time. So KM is a function of people times experiences times space times time. Knowledge is a human condition. It's not a platform or a taxonomy. It's not a library function or a SharePoint site. It's not a community of practice or an intranet. It's all of these things, and it's none of these things. Knowledge is about people. People are social. Knowledge in organizations is a social construct. Knowledge and learning have a symbiotic relationship. If you go back to that Nanaka quote, yet in spite of all the talk about knowledge-based management, there is little understanding of how organizations actually create and manage knowledge. And is it because we struggle to understand that knowledge is a human condition? Therefore, if we want to influence the creation of knowledge, which according to the Deloitte report, organizations want us to do, then what do we as KMers need to do? Do we need to have a better understanding of learning and development? Do we need to have a better understanding of how to influence human capital? Do we need to have a better understanding of the human capital cycle in an organization? Because if this is about people and knowledge management is of the people for the people, then I'd suggest that that is the case. If knowledge is a human condition, then what are you doing at this time to span boundaries, to cross silos in the organization, to work, for example, with HR, with learning and development? What are you doing in those particular areas? Why is KM an IT function? I keep coming back to this question. It's the challenge that constantly gets me on a project by project basis. It frustrates me when I read our literature. It frustrates me when we're trying to move projects on, when we're trying to move KM teams on. We seem so grounded in technology and IT. How do we break that? So as part of this, I said I'd share with you some of the work that we do around benchmarking. Well, to benchmark knowledge management, and just to give you a little bit of a background, my company was set up by the University of Edinburgh because of work that I did on my PhD around benchmarking knowledge and learning capability in organizations. How could we start to look at what a highly mature capability looks like? And for that, I really needed to understand, first of all, for knowledge management, what did it do? And it only ever does 4 things. It acquires and stores, so it acquires knowledge, embeds it, so that's part of the acquisition process. It shares knowledge, it's there to help share what's acquired. It's then there to make sure that or to help people apply knowledge, and then to create knowledge. And for me, when I look at the benchmarking that I've done over the last 12 years, we can talk a lot about maturity around the acquisition and storage phase. We can talk a lot about how we make knowledge available and how it's shared. We really start to struggle when we talk about how we can demonstrate that knowledge is being applied, for good or bad, with the impact piece and the associated results. We really struggle. And the part that we find highly challenging is the creation piece. How can we demonstrate that what we do as knowledge management is leading to continuous improvement, continuous development of the organization, innovation, creative destruction? How are we doing that? And I'm yet to find an organization that can answer those questions. The second part of the matrix is, what does a high-performing knowledge management program do? So it provides leadership. It clearly influences the organization. It can demonstrate that it influences the organization. It has evidence for that. It acts as a strategic provocateur. With organizations that are providing leadership, you can see the tentacles of knowledge management in strategy documents, operational documents. You see it coming through in performance appraisals even, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we also have to look at advocacy. You give voice to the needs of the community you serve. This is where knowledge management needs to create that mutuality that I was talking about, if it's to create meaningful value. Because if knowledge management doesn't create value for the community, that is the organization that we're embedded in, that we serve, then how can they create value for knowledge management? The standard by which KM should be measured is the degree to which mutual benefits are created by the challenges that we, as knowledge managers, turn into opportunities. In this way, KM, for me, needs to move from being a service provider in search of problems to being a solutions provider for our communities. And if we take that approach, then we have to listen to our community. We have to listen to the signals. And if Deloitte are correct, then we've got to respond to that point of knowledge creation and value creation. Knowledge management has to provide those solutions across, and forgive me, I'm quickly moved on. And the other part we need is functional expertise, the ability to walk our talk, to actually be able to create the solutions that people want. And for that, we need the diversity of beliefs, attitudes, skills, knowledge, experience, and talent to work across 4 knowledge domains. And really, there are only 3 that I'm really interested in when I go into an organization. Some of you, I hope that many of you will have heard of Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework. And I take Dave's work, which I see as highly valuable to any organization, and I look at it through a lens of knowledge and learning domains. So knowledge management really needs to be able to respond in the simple, complicated, and complex domains, and I'll explain this. In the simple domain, this is a domain of best practice. There is one right answer, and it's widely known, and we can predict the outcomes if we don't follow that right answer, if you like. Okay, so if I was to ask you, which side of the road should I drive on when I come to Brazil? There is one right answer. And you can quickly start to tell it's widely known, And we can quickly start to predict the outcomes if I drive on the wrong side of the road. Now, in domains like this, with the one right answer, how do I apply for annual leave in your organization? How do I get paid? Knowledge management responds through FAQs, the question and answer portals. They're automated, and it's easy to respond to because actually it's just capturing the one right answer and making it available to people. The complicated domain is where knowledge management starts to get interesting, because the simple domain, technology, great solution. We can argue whether we're talking information and knowledge at that point, but technology works really well. In the complicated domain, we're in the world of better or worse answers, better or worse solutions. So if I was to say to you, we are going to fly to the United States, we're going to land in Tampa on the Gulf Coast, and we are going to hire a car. We've got all the time we need, all the money we need, and we're going to drive as quickly as possible to Seattle on the top of the west coast of the United States. Now, because we've got enough time and money, we're going to get there, all right? But every junction in the road leads to a better or worse decision. That better or worse decision will either accelerate towards our objective, or it's going to hold us back. So for me, we can use technology. We can just go to a sat-nav. But for anybody who's used a sat-nav, we know that it can't be trusted, because it actually takes us down small country lane. If you visit the UK, it takes you down small country lanes that can barely fit a tractor, and you end up driving your car in the sea. There are actually cases of that, by the way. So what we need is a subject matter expert, that maybe somebody who's been in logistics, an accident, weather conditions, a road closure, whatever it might be. They can give us the best route around. They can keep us accelerating towards our objective. The more decision points, the more complicated, the highly complicated scenarios, the more help we need from a subject matter expert. The less effective technology can be. The fewer decision points, more effective. The higher the number of decision points, less effective. For those of you who are thinking go, yes, absolutely. AI has found a solution to play one of the most highly complex decision trees available in games today. However, when it comes to decision points that are emergent, that are changing, constantly shifting, it doesn't work as well. Static environment, good, not so good in a dynamic environment. In the complex domain, we're talking about a domain of emergence. There is no right or wrong answer. What will knowledge management look like in 10 years' time? I can't tell you, you can't tell me. What we need to do is swarm intelligence. We need to be able to access people with political, economical, social, technological, environmental, legal, demographic expertise that can begin to inform us and raise our awareness of the knowns that are out there, so that we can make a prediction anticipate what the future might look like. We can start to step more forward using this swarm of intelligence. And from there, if we get positive confirmation about what we are anticipating, we keep moving. If we get resistance to it, or it doesn't fit what we believed, we rapidly fail, we retreat, and we look at the evidence again and look at another way forward. But we are learning from that state of emergence. Where we get positive feedback, we amplify. Where we get negative feedback, we shut down and rapidly fail. The chaotic domain is one where there isn't really much to learn. It's almost false patterns in learning. And if you look at, we've just been through the 20th anniversary. So if you look at chaos, 9/11, the aircraft hitting the Twin Towers, it shattered the norms on that given day, shattered boundaries and the way that we managed our boundaries, and actually looking at cause and effect. 20 years down the road, we don't actually understand cause and effect because it's unknowable. So when I look at transforming knowledge management and what we mean by the future of knowledge management, I find that Holling's adaptive cycle, which comes from work on ecosystems, is really useful. Conservation in this space is about tight coupling, conforming to norms, storing energy and resources. Release is about a lack of fitness to the landscape, a punctuated equilibrium event, if you like. It's about the need for creative destruction. We don't fit anymore. Reorganization is the realignment to the fitness landscape, and growth is about maximizing benefits of the fitness landscape. We experienced extreme growth of knowledge management in the early to mid-90s and accelerated into the early 2000s. And since then, we've been in a state of conservation. That, for me, is not good enough. We're drifting now. We've spent too long on the sea looking at cloudy skies, reliant on technology as a solution for knowledge application and knowledge creation, and we're failing to notice that it's not working and that we're adrift. That we need now to punctuate this equilibrium of conservation, release from what we're currently doing with knowledge management and look to reorganize. And we have to understand that to do that, we're dealing with people, that knowledge is a human condition. It means influencing self-determining nodes in an organizational ecosystem that's in a constant state of exploitation, conservation, reorganization, and release. So, summarizing for you, knowledge management is the cumulative effect created not by a single node in the system, but by thousands of organizational nodes. Every person, object, and process that acquires, shares, or uses and creates knowledge. That's every person in your organization. Think about that. Every person in your organization is a node in the knowledge management approach. Every person you engage, every object you create, every process you build will have a positive or negative influence on the organization, on the system, on your community. And I need to ask, what is it that you don't know? Because ultimately, we have to go back to some of the questions that were being asked initially around knowledge management is about technology. What's the technology platform? What technology should I use to communicate? What technology should I use to store? What's the best platform for lessons learned? If we look at the questions we're asking about knowledge management and then compare it to the fact that knowledge management exists to acquire and store, share, use, and apply and create knowledge, we seem to be very fixated on the acquisition and storage. So I want to get into actually sharing some tools and some stories with you. And I want to make sure you've got time for some questions and answers. So the first thing I want to ask you is, how do you see the world? So there were some questions about government processes and knowledge management. So I was recently involved in a UK project with a government agency where they had to report on impact, how they were actually impacting stakeholders to create change. The knowledge management program was very interesting because it looked at its network as stakeholders. So it was positive because it was looking at people and it was trying to provide people with knowledge. So it was trying to get those people to access knowledge that they believed would create behavioral change and create benefits for society. So if you can imagine, for example, if we want to move towards being carbon neutral, then if you think of all the stakeholders that we need to impact and the evidence that we need to present them and making sure they get the right knowledge that is persuasive enough that it changes their behavior. So I was called in to have a look at that knowledge management program and basically look at how it was creating impact and the level of impact it was creating. What I found interesting is when you talk to the KM team, they saw their network purely as people. So they looked at it as they were trying to influence stakeholders, people. So they did stakeholder mapping. And they mapped those stakeholders against influence that they believed that they had on the system and their level of interest. And they used that intelligence, if you like, to be able to try and persuade them to change things. What they missed was that actually the network was made up of people and objects, processes and services. That actually, that if you wanted to create change, it wasn't so much about the people, it was about the artifacts or objects that we created. So if you can imagine, we've got a network, and within that network, we are influenced by standard operating procedures, strategy documents, project plans. So when we're looking, if we want to change the behavior of the network, we as knowledge management actually need to look at the objects that are influencing people, and we need to influence the object itself. So for example, if we want to change behaviors, then we want to influence the strategy document that is influencing people within the system. If we want to change the way that a project is working, we need to look at the objects that are driving people's actions. And when we see the world, instead of just being about people, but people and objects, then actually we find ways to influence the system quicker. So in this case, for example, it came down to looking at key documents that were being used by government and making sure that we were influencing the content of those documents, the wording of those documents, and making sure that processes were being embedded in those documents that could then change behaviors. The focus became on the asset, the object, and not the people. And when we were speaking before, we were talking about, moving knowledge to action and the little things that we can sometimes do to ensure that that we move and we stimulate action. So I was recently working with a very large pharmaceutical company. They are a well-known global brand, and they had a project that was called Knowledge with Wings. And they have a project called Knowledge with Wings. And what they want to do is they produce knowledge and they're trying to give it wings, Red Bull. And what they did was they created a new community. They want people to share stories, share their knowledge, and they are going to reward people for likes. So you share your knowledge, you get a like. The more likes you get, the more points you get. The more points you get prizes, because there is a company store where you can convert your points, your likes to points, your points to a reward. You can go buy a bag. You can buy a pen, whatever it might be, okay? The problem is that things like this, they don't tell us anything. You have to ask, so what? What does the like mean? We don't know anything behind it. Not only that, go back to that idea of what knowledge management is about. We do a very good job of acquiring and sharing, but so what? The data tells us nothing. There is no evidence for action. So instead, a small change that can create a huge impact is that actually you only get points if you share and somebody else can demonstrate they've used it. So you share your knowledge. We're not going to do the likes, which can be just a popularity contest, or it can be gamed so that you can get prizes, but you share the knowledge, you get points, more points, when somebody actually demonstrates that they accessed it and used it. So they share the story of how they used your knowledge. You now get more points, and the person who shared the story, whether it's a positive or negative effect, they get points. A small change going from a thumbs up to something more meaningful in an exchange of stories, it gives us the evidence that we're looking for that moves us from just talking about acquisition and storage and sharing to action, to applying the knowledge. So when I look at projects, and going back to that notion of benchmarking, we look at the 6 V's of knowledge to action. So we look at how quick the velocity, how quickly we're accessing knowledge, how quick when something's generated, when an incident occurs, how quickly we're actually generating access to that knowledge, how How long is the learning cycle? How can we shorten it? How can we make it more efficient, more effective? We look at the veracity. How reliable is what's being presented? What's the quality assurance process? Where we're looking at complex knowledge, the volume of information that is presented. So the variety and the volume to make sure that we have that diversity of view to be so that you can take that best guess forward. How then valuable is it? And how visible is it? We then look at how we can look at how we report on value. And this came out of very early work that I was doing, which was down in the Middle East, which started with a government organization and then moved into hydrocarbon. And for any knowledge management project, when I'm looking to assess it, aside from the indicators around the 6 V's, I want to know, how do people feel about knowledge management? So our customers, the people who are helping to create this mutual benefit, how do they feel about our knowledge management offerings, our solutions? Because we know that if there is just that dirty data, that dirty response of like and dislike, if people don't feel good about what we're doing, then our influence diminishes. So how do people feel? From there, I want to know, how are they accessing what we're capturing? So, for example, if you've got a lessons learned database, it's great that you can turn around to me and say, David, this is the number of submissions, this is the number of people who have accessed it, but I want to know how we've moved to action. Because if we can't demonstrate access to action, then actually it's meaningless. So the more people who have positive feelings, the more people will access our knowledge management offerings. The more people who access, if it is presented in the right way, if it has the right visibility, the right veracity, the right variety, the right value, and that relevance, then we're more likely to get action. The more people who take action, then I need to understand, how are we creating impact? The fact that you took action doesn't mean that that it was a positive response. It could have been a negative response. So I want to know how we create impact. And I want evidence for that impact. So we need to understand how we get that data. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. From there, I want that to translate to results. I want to be able to quantify it. I want to demonstrate improvements, gains to safety, time, efficiencies, innovation, that creation piece, continuous improvement, quality, cost, and customer employee experience. That means that I need access to quantitative and qualitative data. So if I look at a live project at the moment that is looking at data-driven and knowledge-driven decision-making and problem-solving, okay? So we see a high value in terms of knowledge as an asset to the organization. And the organization is interested in creating a single point of truth, if you like, that idea that we can get to the right knowledge when we need it. The problem is that if we look at all the 6 V's, we would say that we're data poor, and there is a lack of evidence in terms of impact and the results, the value that we're creating, which if you look at the knowledge management team, you'd say they have a low level of influence when it comes to reporting outside of knowledge management to the executive team. And then we're really looking at a situation where we're reliant on the goodwill of a champion who's willing to fall on his or her sword if knowledge management doesn't deliver. It's not a good position to be in. So when I've gone in, we're looking at where we can start. Where do we start to do a better job of acquiring, sharing, using, and creating knowledge? And how do we create influence? Every organization is going to have a different starting point. But for me, I've gone to a very unusual place. I'm going to a management training program. And the reason that I'm interested in this management training program is that it's new. and it's going to be impacting all the middle managers in the organization. And they're some of the most influential people in the organization. If I influence them, then we can get the evidence we need to influence the executive team. We can get the data that shows that people are accessing and actioning knowledge to create positive impact and results. So to do this, what I'm interested in is creating a learning swarm. As you go through this management development program, there are expectations now that you are going to be conducting micro experiments as you go through the program. So you're going to be trying new things. And instead of lessons learned, we are interested in a TED Talk that demonstrates what you did, what you accessed, how you did it, who was needed, the skills that were required, the artifacts, skills, heuristics, experience, and natural talent that you needed to be able to succeed, or what held you back. These micro experiments create retrospectives. Within the retrospectives, we get reflections, which gives us the data that we're looking for. So if I create the right type of template that can really nudge the evidence for learning and knowledge creation, knowledge application, and knowledge creation and knowledge reuse, then I'm creating evidence for knowledge management in terms of impact and results. But to do that, we need to understand adult learning principles. We need to understand that knowledge is about learning. If we're interested in how people learn, then we need to understand adult learning principles. More than this, it's about cross-boundary. So if I look at a management development program and I want to create evidence for people learning, innovating, and knowledge management being the single point of truth in terms of what's happening in the organization and impact and results, then I need to find different ways to nudge people to provide the data I need, the information I need to show, for us to be able to sense, anticipate, and respond to what's going on. So, for example, we can now look at how we tie into the company's competency matrix. The competency matrix looks at things like growth for good, for innovation. In doing things like that, people need to provide evidence that they're actually doing these things. If we can provide them the means to present the evidence, we get the information we need for impact and results. We're influencing the knowledge flows. We're creating swarms of lessons learned. We're creating swarms around knowledge artifacts. More than this, we're now looking at how this links to informal and formal appraisals. Hook into the competency matrix, it naturally becomes a part of the annual appraisal process. In the annual appraisal process, if I've got good knowledge management processes and services that you find useful, then you're going to access them because you use it to generate evidence for your appraisal. Your appraisal, in this particular case, ties in to a reward system. In tying into the reward system, it naturally ties into your annual bonus. So therefore, if we can now demonstrate that knowledge management provides solutions that develops the evidence you need to get higher appraisal ratings, and through higher appraisal ratings, a bigger bonus in your annual reward, you can imagine we're suddenly providing value to our customers. In providing value to the customers, they're looking at it and see it as knowledge management is providing value to them. It's mutuality. This is what we're looking for, a mutually beneficial relationship that creates value for knowledge management, for our customers, and for the wider organization. In doing this, once we've got the data for results, when we can talk about actual when we can quantify the results around things like safety, time, innovation, quality, cost, customer employee experience, we can now look at a valid sample where we can report with 95% certainty, confidence interval of 5%, plus or minus 5%, and now I can start to talk to you about the return on investment from our KM program. And this we have applied across sectors, but it needs to go through the full process. The big picture is great, and I'm trying to share as much as I possibly can in a short space of time, but we constantly want to nudge what's happening. So this nudge knowledge flows, to accelerate it. We want people to do it organically as a natural part of going to work, because knowledge management makes work life better. Okay? And so one of the things that we look at is we've used this tool now in 3 different countries, and it's about nudging actions. So when you work with people on it, this is applied in a project management environment, and what we tell people is that, or how we ask people to use this. When you're working with somebody, you'll notice that you have shared knowledge. You both know the same things, okay? So it's known to yourself and it's known to other people in your team. And we ask people to stay alert. That's great, keep enriching that, but we ask them to stay alert for things that might change. You'll also find that when you're working with people, that there are things that they know that you don't know about how you do your job. You might be working with externals where you find spot gaps in processes, operating procedures, planning. So it now becomes known to other people, but it's unknown to you, but you discover the gap. When you discover the gap, we ask you to act quick. We want you to be able to find the solution. We want you to be able to share what you did. We want you to be able to identify the artifacts, the objects you needed, the skills, the knowledge, the experienced natural talent, heuristics that enabled you to solve the problem and share it quickly. Here we tie back into things like the competency framework, annual appraisals, where it becomes part of the conversation. So in an annual appraisal meeting, it will be, what have you discovered that you didn't know, and what have you done about it? And if you can't answer if you say you haven't discovered anything, then unfortunately that has a negative impact on your appraisal process, because we know we are continuously learning. We continuously spot gaps. More than this, we ask people to understand that it's great that there are times where things are obvious. Okay, there are times like working on a project team where I know that somebody doesn't, I don't know what they know. But there are times where that's not visible, that people know things that you are unaware of because they're not happy to share it with you. You're not trusted. You don't share their space and time. They don't see you as competent or relating to them enough that they freely share things with you, as an example. So we ask people to probe, to ask powerful questions that surface the knowledge. When that knowledge surfaces and you see the gap, you act quick. We also consider that, especially when we ask people to consider, especially when they're dealing with experts with high levels of knowledge, there are things that they know that they don't even know themselves. So that we need to consider that, especially, as I said, when dealing with experts or group of experts. So again, it goes back to powerful questioning, probing, surface the knowledge, act quick, and then making sure that we are staying alert for changes within that knowledge base. But we want people to take action themselves. And we use this with project teams, we've used this with nursing teams, and it comes down to being able to ask powerful questions, to probe the environment, to surface the gap. And once you've surfaced the gap, being able to act. Ultimately, I'm going back to one of the last examples before I go to take questions. Is we are looking to influence people. Knowledge is a human condition. People are self-determining. You cannot control them as you would a piece of data. They determine whether they feel that other people are competent enough, relate to them enough, and whether they freely share. And so it goes back to that idea of exit interviews. Remember at the start I said, what brings us to do exit interviews? What happens instead of doing exit interviews? We work with the team that is remaining, the people that are staying in the organization, and ask them to acquire the knowledge by teaching them to ask better questions of people. So instead of going through 90-minute exit interviews and saying, let's capture what you know that could be critical to the business, why don't we work with the team that's staying and teach them, give them the tools that allow them to capture the knowledge that's important to them? Because they are seen by the person who's leaving as being fit enough to inherit the knowledge. They have the shared time and space. They have shared competence. They have that shared understanding of the challenges and opportunities, the pain, and there's more willingness on the person who's leaving to share that knowledge with them. So we give them tools. We ask them to, so we've used this on nursing teams, project teams, you name it. And we give them tools that bring them to ask better questions. For example, and I'll take you through the 6, if I was to say to you that you are now in charge of your organization and you have a magic wand and you could change one thing about knowledge management, what would it be? If I were to give you that magic wand and you could do whatever you wanted in your organization, what would be the one thing you wouldn't change? So we're asking a powerful question using if. We don't ask why. We don't tell people, why did you do that? Why did you make that decision? Just asking the why question puts people on the back foot. Makes them feel defensive. It's the way it's presented. It takes a lot of skill to ask a why question in such a way that it doesn't feel like a challenge or a test. So instead, to make it easier, we can rephrase it. What brought you to make that decision? What were the circumstances that brought that decision about? If I decide, or if I use what you're telling me, then what will I likely see happen? If I change the way that I do this, if I change the way that you do this process and use your approach, then what will be the benefit? How will that improve our performance as a team? Use what, not how. So as an example, coming out of this presentation today, hopefully you're getting some tips and you feel like you can use it. And you've got about 5 minutes before you go into the next presentation and somebody pings you on WhatsApp or gives you a call and says, how did it go with Dave's keynote? You might turn around and go, rubbish, yeah, didn't get anything from it, nothing. Or there might be something really valuable. But your brain is hopefully in a situation at the moment where it's being taxed. Okay, it is getting to a point of load where you're experiencing ego depletion. All right. It now wants to preserve energy. So if you can imagine, you've been in a meeting, any meeting that you attend, high levels of interaction, high levels of information being exchanged, lots going on around you, and you've got a short break. Your brain acts to protect you. So if somebody comes along and says, okay, how did things go in that meeting? How did things go with Dave? That you get an automated response, a system 1 response. Fine, good, yeah, okay. It's a poor question. We found this working with nursing teams. I was working with a hospital on the West Coast of the United States, and we were talking about how critical incidents happen within the team. And the nurses would blame the consultant that's coming in and saying, he or she just doesn't share knowledge with us. That's the problem. Or is it a case of the nurses weren't asking powerful questions that brought a consultant that is going from case to case to share more knowledge? So instead of asking, how did things go with Dave? It could be, what was the one thing that came out of Dave's keynote that could really create an impact for us? Now, just by rephrasing that question, you can't go with an automated system 1 response. You've got to engage system 2. You've got to give it thought, reflection. You've got to engage with me. You still might want to deflect, but now we have to engage, and I'm likely to get something more valuable. Go back to that radar. Next thing, and this comes from improvisation, improv acting, never reject someone. Never shut them down. You may think that they're having the worst idea on the planet, but instead of shutting them down, accept what they're saying and try and redirect them. So if you want to accelerate a knowledge flow and you're in a meeting, you don't want to shut people down through rejection. You want to accept their position and then try and redirect through a more powerful question. And the last thing is never ask a question that you wouldn't ask yourself. Answer yourself. So if I've been on working with project teams where there's been a succession piece and a new manager is coming in and they want to get the measure of the team, and they might turn around to one of the project managers and say, right, I've heard about your team. Where do you think the biggest challenge for me is? And that project manager will turn around and go, that's interesting. You've heard about the team. Where do you think the biggest challenge is? Well, if you don't answer that question, you will shut down trust. You'll slow the knowledge flow down because trust has been broken because you haven't been willing to answer a question that you have asked of somebody else. So never ask a question that you wouldn't answer yourself. The final thing I want to share with you is this notion of how do we actually bring around influence and deal with situations where people will say, I don't have time for knowledge management. I don't have time to do lessons learned. I don't have time to join your community of practice. There are a couple of things that I need you to understand. Whenever we hear people say that they don't have time, what they're actually saying is there's something else. I either don't feel competent enough to be able to engage in what you're doing, or I don't believe what you're doing will create a future where I can be competent, and so therefore I'm going to reject it. I don't feel that I'm competent enough to come into this meeting and share my knowledge, so I'm not going to do it. And I'm not going to tell you that's the reason. I'm just going to say I don't have time. Or they don't believe they have a choice in the matter. If you think of any situation where you have been told to do something, your natural position is, hang on a second, I don't have time. I've got much more important things to be doing than just doing as I'm told by you. So when we tell people you've got to go and do a lessons learned or participate in a community of practice, if they don't feel competent or they don't feel like they have a choice, they start to shut down. The final thing is relatedness. If I don't relate to the need to do this, if I don't understand how it creates value for me, then I will reject it. I will naturally shut down. So if I say to somebody of knowledge management, turn around and say to somebody, you must participate in a lessons learned program, you must complete a lessons learned form, you must upload it. I don't have time. I don't have time means I either don't feel competent in the technology, in the process. I don't have time because you're not giving me a choice, or I don't have time because I don't see the value in this in the first place. Go back to that, the energy company that's just collecting lessons learned and people aren't using it. I don't have time for the lessons learned program. Why? Because I don't relate to it. Because when you go in there, 90% of what's in there doesn't mean anything to us. The final thing that I want you to share with you is the behavioral change stairway. This is used by the FBI in crisis situations around hostage negotiations. And I found it to be one of the most powerful tools that I can share with a knowledge management team in terms of getting them to understand how to create value in that idea of mutual value creation and people developing solutions for people instead of services in search of problems. So when we see a situation where we get the organization saying, or go back to that Deloitte report, we want to create knowledge, we've got to do a better job of getting value from our knowledge. The typical response from knowledge management is they assume influence. They assume that they have the authority and they jump in and start telling people what to do. They start going, but we can do this. We've got this great SharePoint site. And you know something? I'll tell you all the benefits of this SharePoint site. And not only that, I'm going to come along and I'll show you how easy it is to use this SharePoint site. And then they go, why are people telling us they don't have time? If we go back through the process, we need to start as knowledge managers by being curious and engaging people. We need to listen to people and actively listen to people. When we've done that, we can develop empathy. Empathy for me means that we can describe the world according to our customers to the point where they go, that's right. When they tell us that's right, we can start to look at the common ground, to share the common stories, the common experiences that allow us to build rapport. And through rapport, we get trust and permissions to influence. When we've got the permissions to influence, we can bring about the behavioral change that the organization is looking for because we are creating mutual value. We can't bring about that behavioral change without influence. We cannot have influence unless we have rapport, which is that common ground. We cannot get that common ground until we get people turning around to us and going, yes, that's right. That is my world. At that point, you've got the empathy, and you can't have the empathy without actively listening and engaging people in a curious manner. And those tools there, if you can sew them together, you're starting to see a different view on knowledge management that expands well beyond technology. We're getting into the science of learning, behavioral science, organizational behavior, psychology. We're talking about a totally different view on what knowledge management could be. And that, for me, is the challenge for you. Can we move away from technology and start understanding that knowledge management is about knowledge? Knowledge is a human condition. People are social. People protect their knowledge where it is a case of people protect their knowledge because they need to know that they are sharing with people that are competent to inherit it, that feel they have a choice in the matter, and that they relate, they share that same time and space. Knowledge management is about processes, is about systems, is about solutions that understands people in their environment, their experiences of a space and time. Apologies. That will teach me to use Apple. Are we still there?
Yeah, you're still with us.
Thank you very much. So apologies, I'm going to share with you the truth. That was my daughter who knows better than to call me because she's away in Malta at the moment and who was told, do not disturb daddy until 8 p.m. And what has she done? Called at 7:40. So that is the reality of having a 10-year-old daughter. So first of all, thank you so much for bearing with me. It's always challenging to talk to a screen for an hour and a half instead of having people in front of you. I hope that what I've been able to communicate to you is meaningful and valuable, that gives a different perspective. And now if you've got questions, I will do my best to answer them for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, thank you very much for this speech. I think I can say on the behalf of everybody, it's such incredible to see you explaining all that with such clarity. And you got my brain boiling here with your ideas. Really appreciate. Okay, so guys, here's how we go. We are already over time a little bit, but we will stay with Dave for more 15 minutes. So we will have time for a few questions. Please use the question tab on Doity to share your questions, and you can use the vote function with the thumbs up on the questions that you have more interest on. So I'll start from the top with a question from Roberto Jr., which took me a few seconds to realize it's Beto. Beto, thank you for putting your real name by the end of your question. And it goes like this. So, is it possible to insert knowledge management into business activities? Or do we have to kind of destroy and recreate business processes to incorporate knowledge management as part of the business?
Very good question. And it's a chicken and egg scenario in many ways. So from knowledge management, if you have if you have engaged your community and see the opportunity, it is about destroying existing processes, because knowledge management is bringing something new. It is innovating. It is going to change the way the business operates in terms of systems and processes and people, their talent. So actually knowledge management through that engagement piece, if we go back to that stairway, by listening to the community and building empathy and rapport, we get to the point of actually knowledge management now has the credible influence to be able to destroy what currently exists. It becomes more challenging when knowledge management goes away, sits in a silo somewhere in its box, comes out, assumes it's got influence, and attempts to destroy something. I hope that answers the question. But it can happen either way. It's an opportunity or a challenge within the business and how we understand it and respond to it and anticipate it.
Awesome. Okay, second question I have here. Should the organizational functions that have most influence on knowledge flow be integrated, like IT and education intelligence, innovation? Is there a better approach? Like, should we integrate everything, or some of those functions are more relevant and we should put focus on?
Yeah, it's about swarming. You know, if we go back to that idea of the knowledge domains, there is a time where it's appropriate that knowledge management, IT has the response in the simple domain, one right answer. We need a Q&A forum. Okay, we need to make sure we acquire the best practice, the best answer, and make it available. But we don't need learning and development experts as an example at that point. But as we move then into other spaces, especially the complicated and complex space, then we need to make sure that we are swarming that diversity. You know, I talked about Ashby's law and requisite variety. As the complicatedness increases and we move to complexity, then we need that swarm. And that's when we need the boundary spanning. And it's recognizing the environment we're in, and that it is appropriate to swarm and cross boundaries. And not only that, more than being appropriate, it's critical.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Third question I have here from Luis, and Luis, sorry, I will rephrase just a little bit of your question. Hopefully I will still capture the essence of it. So we are all working on teams that are different, right? In that sense, we are all different. We came from different generations with different background, with motivation, how much we are willing to learn new stuff along our careers, right? So we are different person, right? And what's the limit for the usage of technology in this universe where we are dealing with people that are so different?
It's the limit on the use of technology. So it's interesting. We have to find new ways to interact with technology and to use technology in such ways that we can improve knowledge flows. And what I'll give you an example of is and the example of proxemics. The more intimacy between people, the greater the exchange of knowledge. The more distance, the less. So when we come into a virtual environment, probably like so many people around the world, yeah, I've spent a lot of time on Zoom and Teams, you name it, Google Hangout, oh my gosh. All right, that notion of being able to find more intimacy where we feel more connected to people is the way that we can share and edit using things like whiteboards, where we feel a connection to the other person in the digital space and feel for more intimacy that we share more knowledge because we are editing in a whiteboard environment. It's an interactive space as opposed to something like we are here where that interaction is low, less intimacy. So we have to discover new ways of doing things. We've got to be curious and find new ways to understand what knowledge means and how that knowledge can be accelerated. And as I said, there's work out there that's about 10 years old, I think now, on digital proxemics and something called eerie spaces. All right, but it's really interesting for knowledge managers that are having to work in, for example, Zoom environments.
Gotcha. And this technology aspect works in parallel with the connection?
Yes.
Can one help the other, you mean?
Yes, exactly. So if we want to improve the connection between people, so it improves levels of trustworthiness, that we get that knowledge flow accelerated, then how can we facilitate a space where they are connected and interacting and editing, such as a whiteboard function?
Gotcha. All right. Next one would be from Julieta. So creating knowledge is really connected to our capacity to put in motion the competency of connecting existence to knowledge, right? So for us to create really something new, let me just see the best way to phrase this. Okay, so how our capacity to learn, unlearn, and relearn is correlated to this knowledge management context?
That's a challenging question. I do like, whoever's asked it, I do like this, that you've picked up on the fact that it's about unlearning as much as learning. That's one of, you could argue that is the big challenge for us as knowledge management at the moment, is this unlearning piece, that we've got to destroy what has gone before to reorganize and exploit a new future, a different form of a future. And so for me, in terms of, the link, there's so much, it's such a huge question, so apologies, because there are things here that we could get into, such as, if you're curious, first of all, it starts with curiosity. The next thing we need to do is we look at things around locus of control. So people having internal, external locus of control and what that means. We also need to understand things like field dependent, field independent learners. What does that mean? So a field independent learner is somebody that is more likely to be self-directed, exploratory, curious. A field dependent learner wants to be guided and really directed in their learning and what to do. So how do we understand the different needs of people in that environment, and then how do we support both in terms of learning and knowledge flows? If I'm understanding the question correctly.
Absolutely. Okay, we still have a few minutes left for a couple more questions. Next one on my list would be from Flávio Doro. Do you agree and do you believe in the fifth discipline from Peter Senge in the concept of the learning organization that he advocates?
Yes. Yes, I do believe in the learning organization. And that is not necessarily a totally popular opinion. I believe that, as with any concept, if you're listening to my discussion today, there'll be parts that you go, hopefully, there are parts that you listen to and you go, yeah, that's interesting and makes sense, and there'll be other parts that you go, oh, no, I don't know. And it's like that with Senge's work and the fifth discipline. The learning organization, the nature of a learning organization is something to aspire to, okay? And there are parts that I believe that we should be really looking at. Just as I said, go back, look at the work of Nanaka from 2000 and that notion of bar and knowledge creation and the spiral of knowledge creation. Well, what we're really talking about are learning organizations. We can't separate knowledge and learning in that way. So a long answer to what should be a short answer, which is yes.
Awesome. Okay, last question here. So our audiences will have time to a little break before the next session. What advice would you give for a bottom-up knowledge management initiative? And let me add to this question, is there a better approach when it comes to bottom-up, top-down initiative, or
holistic? It's about being holistic. When we talk about bottom-up, what do we mean? Because to create bottom-up, we need to understand the needs. To understand the needs, we've got to engage. For example, we've got to engage with key stakeholders. I'll give you a clear example. So I was recently involved. So one of the world's largest car manufacturers, knowledge management team, and they're looking at it going, we want to create bottom up. Okay, who are the top people that you are looking to influence? So you're going to create this bottom up. All right. What are you looking to influence? Give me their top 3 challenges and their top 3 opportunities. What they couldn't do it, didn't know. So what are you creating then? How are you creating this bottom up? You've gone into your bubble and you're looking to influence what? You know, it's this idea, and this is what we have to shift away from. If there's one thing that I could leave everybody with, and perhaps this is good as a final question, is knowledge management for me, all right, from my experience, needs to stop developing solutions in search of problems. Okay? It really needs to look at being a solutions provider that creates value for its customers. And in creating value for its customers, knowledge management becomes more valuable. It cannot be about knowledge management going, we've got a great intranet, a great SharePoint site, and now we're going to go out to the business and we're going to find people who can use it. That's not how to create a sustainable, resilient knowledge management program, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I totally agree. Awesome. Okay, so that will be all for today. Dave, one more time, thank you so much for sharing all those insights with us and going through the huddle of time zones and all that. We really, really appreciate all the insights and helping us with the knowledge management journey in Brazil. Really appreciate all that.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. See you in the next session.